Alrighty, so I'm going to go over here a little bit about nutrition coaching and the methods that we use. Right, so I've got here basically 6 steps. One of the biggest challenges is how do you implement some form of nutrition, lifestyle coaching, and some accountability when you have a large group of clients, right? So we're going to try and treat them individually, even if the types of training that they're doing are either going to be, for what we do, semi-private or in a small group PT kind of setting. All right, so I've got here this little picture of the GPS analogy. So point A is where someone's currently at. Point B is where they want to go, aka that end goal, dream goal. For that analogy, the GPS. So what we're trying to see ourselves as is that GPS. They're telling us where they want to go, and we're there to guide them, point them in the right direction, find that most efficient way to get there, right? And that's really what the coaching process is all about. So a couple of quotes I've got here, which is assessment precedes awareness, okay? And awareness precedes change. So a lot of this is going to be about increasing the client's awareness of their own problem, but also their own behaviors, their own habits that are going to either be the make or the break of them achieving the goal, okay? So step 1, assess. So assessing is where we're going to get that info. So their goals, really important obviously, their needs, and also their skills, which I'll touch on a little bit in a moment. So a big part of that can be through when you do your initial consultation, but also client intake forms. So when they fill out that form, getting as much information as possible about the goals, their background, their history, give them a good chance to actually go away and fill that out in as much detail as you can. When we're doing our measurements, they're going to be objective and subjective. So it can be things like, your body weight, for example. You can do progress photos. You can do ways to assess body fat percentage. What we do is things like body weight. We also do circumferences to complement that. When we talk about subjective measures, they're things that are going to relate to how somebody feels more than anything else, right? So for a lot of people, yes, they want to lose weight, for example, but more importantly, they want to feel good about themselves, they want to feel energetic, they want to feel confident, etc. So subjective questions, we're like a 1 to 10. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in the way that your clothes fit at the moment, for example? Tracking things like that, super important. And then we've got our discover and monitor. Okay, so this is where we want to get a little bit of information from our clients. So ideally, we're going to go for at least 7 days here. So that can be something like, hey, if they're up for it, tracking your food in a MyFitnessPal or food tracking app. If they're not, no stress at all. We could do a journal, for example, photos of their food. And that comes down to having that conversation, like, hey, have you used a tracking app before? Would you be willing to put that in there? We just want to see what you're currently doing. Or, same deal, if you're not up for that, cool, would you be happy to write down? If we give you a little format, write down each time you have a meal, what's in the meal, etc. Or could you just pull your phone out for me when you have a meal and just take a photo of it? Right? Do you think you could do that for me for 7 days? They're going to say yes to one of the 3, right? This is going to do 2 things. Gives us or you the information, also increases awareness, right? Automatically, they are going to start making better choices, or at the very least, they're going to be more aware of what they're currently doing, okay? And that's why that monitor process is actually quite important. Moving into our second part of the equation here, which is understanding, okay? We want to hear their story, right? So when they're telling you about things they've tried before, like, oh, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Even when it's about their goals, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Getting to really understand where they're coming from is super, super important in this process. Also comes back down to what we're trying to establish. When we say skills, right? So do they have the willingness to make the changes? Like, what are they willing to do and what are they not willing to do? How disciplined is this person willing to be, for example? And also, like, how able are they? Like, willing and able, right? So do they have the knowledge to actually do it, right? Because if they don't have the knowledge to track their food in MyFitnessPal, it's going to be a big barrier right away, right? So maybe that's where we're more going to go for the photos option, if they've never tried anything like that before. The willingness comes down to like how much effort are they willing to put into, and you know, if they've got a history of things that haven't worked so well, are they willing to do that again, or do we need to do something different, right? Understanding that super, super important. We're gonna get context and history before we do any planning, okay? I think this step gets skipped a lot. I'm gonna go straight from, you know, establishing that and being like, sweet, this person needs a calorie deficit. Let's go 300 to 500 calories a day deficit, set them some macros, now on their way they go, and then wonder why it doesn't work. It's probably because this is missing. So what we've got here is learn about them, make sure you understand the problem. Understanding the problem is the key to solving the problem, okay? So don't gloss over that, super, super important. Then we've got strategize, okay? This is when we're gonna start drafting up some initial action steps and like the overall approach that we're gonna use for this client. We wanna get 2 to 3 action items, okay? Ideally from them. Like, what do they think they can start doing, okay? Can be really simple things. So from there, we're gonna talk about this idea of like a little bit of trial and error. Like, let's try this and see how it goes, right? Or, hey, let's do a little experiment, something like that. The reason that we want to throw things like this in there as well is if you're just monitoring all the time, people want to feel like, you know, they're being told what to do sometimes, even though we want them to be the one that's gaining the skills. So I want to make sure we are throwing our 2 cents in the equation as well. So knowing what we're going to measure is super, super important when we're doing a little bit of trial and error. So it's like, okay, cool, what are you currently doing? Use a random example that happens here a lot. Like I typically, like I don't really have anything for breakfast, and then I have a coffee at some point, and then just after lunch I get really hungry, so I'll have that, but maybe I'll have some biscuits with it as well. Then late afternoon I'm really hungry, so I'll start snacking, yada, yada, yada. Okay, cool. Do you think we can start having breakfast? Yep, great. What are we gonna have for breakfast, etc. Right, so then that's what we're gonna do. The measurement that we're gonna use is, have you had breakfast each day, right? Then we're gonna get them in our next section to change one thing and one thing only, right? So this is where we're gonna choose that one action. And the simplest way here is like, okay, cool. If they've given you 2 to 3 action items previously and you establish them, it's like, all right, sweet. Which one would you get after first? Like, which one would you like to change first? And if they go, oh, breakfast, for example, it's like, sweet, we're going breakfast. If they go, and they're not really sure, they're not confident, then we go to like, would you like to hear what's worked really well for clients like you here in the past? It's like, yeah, I would. Then, not that we're deliberately trying to put words in their mouth, but we kind of are, which is, here's 2 to 3 things, right? Don't just choose one thing, give them a couple of options. And then if we use our lunch example, or sorry, breakfast example, cool. Having breakfast, because then that way you're not really hungry by lunchtime. Like, even though you're not super hungry in the morning, what's happening here is that's catching up with you, and then you overeat. So you're actually eating more food across the course of a day. So if we have breakfast, let's get after that. Or it could be, let's try and have a protein source in every meal, or whatever you think it is. It could be real basic, like let's focus on drinking 2 liters of water a day, whatever it needs to be, right? We want them to then choose from those suggestions. So we're like, yep, you know what, I can drink 2 liters of water a day. Like, sweet. That's our one thing at this point, okay? Then we want to go, how do they do it? And be really clear about it. The exact steps, right? So not, okay, sweet, you're gonna have breakfast. It's like, cool, so when, how, when? Like, cool, so like I get my kids ready at this time and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, sweet. So just before you're getting them ready, like, do you have a window here? Sweet. What are you gonna have? Map it out. All right, we're gonna have some, I don't know, some Greek yogurt, some berries, whatever the hell, right? Cool, you're gonna do that at this time. Do you think you can do that? That's the key, right? Then, when we say, do we think they can do it, we wanna get them to give us a rating on how likely they think it is. So the question I would use would be, all right, cool. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can do this 90% of the time going forward? And we're looking for at least an 8 out of 10, right? So they're like, 10, sweet. 9, sweet. 8. Yeah, okay, that's all fine. If they say like 7, or they go like 6, it's like, okay, maybe that's too difficult. we need to go something more basic, right? Because we want them to be super confident, like it's a no-brainer that they can do this. Then, from there, pair the relevant resources. Okay, so we've got recipe guides, meal guides, might be a basic plan or something like that. Pair that with them, all right? So A, they're getting something, that's good, but B is giving them information that's gonna make it easier for them to do that one thing. Moving into step 5 here, which is monitoring. So depending on the program they do, might have different accountability and support within that. So for example, we're doing semi-private and we do small group. Semi-private, we get a little bit more one-on-one interaction by default. Okay, so you're speaking to those people more each time. So it kind of makes sense to speak about their one thing when you have them in front of you. Small group, you don't always get that same opportunity. Okay, that's just how it is. It's also, you're probably going to have a price point difference between the two as well. Step 2 here within monitor is focusing on the process over progress, or process over outcome, we say here a lot. So what this kind of means is talking about, okay, how many days out of 7 did you have breakfast, for example? We're not like, oh, how'd you go to the weight loss this week? It's not that we don't want them to lose weight, we do. And we're still going to measure stuff like that, don't get me wrong. But focusing on the process to drive home those behaviors that are going to influence the outcome. So that's where we're spending most of our energy, and that's the messaging that we're going to reinforce all the time. So when we're doing our check-ins and follow-up, we want to make sure they're relevant. So making sure it's, how did you go with X? So how did you go with that one thing? Breakfast, protein in the meal, drinking the water, whatever it is, right? Did you do this? So did you have the breakfast? Great. What went well about it? Great. Were there any obstacles? What were they? Right? So we're asking kind of direct questions here. We want to constantly be reinforcing that this is going to be a non-linear process, right? So GPS analogy again, it's never going to be smooth sailing from point A to point B. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, right? So reinforcing that all the time. Like, it's okay if you miss a day, it's okay, if you miss 2 days, it doesn't matter. There's going to be ups and downs. We're just reinforcing that idea that let's just focus on the process. Yes, there's going to be ups and downs, but over the long haul, you're going to be making progress, which is what you said you wanted when we were talking about your goals. Then, clearly map out everything and get agreement from them. So, okay, I'm going to send you an email each week checking in on this kind of stuff. Does that work for you? Sweet. I'm going to send it on this day. Does that work for you? Great. Can you make sure that you can, get back to me, because I need to really know how you're doing, and the open communication is really going to be key for this to work. Does that sound like something you can do? Great, carry on. If they're like, oh, I don't really check my email, it's like, cool, well, probably don't try and email them, right? So maybe then you text them or you do whatever else. It doesn't really matter, but make sure we're getting agreement on that. When it comes to our 6th step here, evaluate. So is it working? Great. And how long have they been doing it for? 2 really important factors, right? So what we really want to be doing is chasing like 80% compliance at a minimum over at least 14 days, but ideally like 21 days plus, right? So have you been having breakfast? Great. Have you done it 80% of the time? Great. Have you done it for at least 2, but ideally 3 or more weeks? Fantastic. If we've done that, then we can start to look at adding one more thing, okay? So not adding a whole bunch of stuff, adding one more thing to complement that initial change, right? If they're not hitting 80%, and I would say before 14 days, so like at that 7-day mark, hey, I've done it twice out of 7 days. It's like, all right, we either need to revisit what that one thing is, maybe it's too hard, maybe it's unrealistic, or we offer some support, some additional resources, and maybe go back to this idea of clearly mapping out exactly how they can do that one thing so they're not confused, right? So either one of those. The little acronym here we have, so we assess, understand, strategize, do one thing, monitor and evaluate. Awesome, or awesome, whatever you want to call it. For us, how we're going to do this is we basically break our 6 steps kind of into 3. So in the onboarding process, that's where we're going to assess and we're going to get our understanding. Okay, so obviously when we're doing that consultation with them in the first place, we're assessing, we're getting information. That intake form is going to get us the information, and when we're onboarding them, we're getting that information and we're getting a little bit more understanding about them, their background, etc. For our strategy section, that's kind of 3 and 4 here. So when we're doing the strategy session itself, we are drafting possible steps. We're going these 2 or 3 things. We're getting them to pick the one thing, and then we're mapping out exactly how they can do the one thing, right? So we're mapping out that whole process for them, making it super, super simple, and establishing how we're going to measure it. That's the purpose of that second step. Then we do our checkpoint. So monitoring is kind of a constant, right, in the background. So that can be your weekly check-ins, etc. The evaluate, doing that in the checkpoint session. So ideally, it's going to be about 30 days after they start, right? So that's when we can look at a training, lifestyle as a whole, results as a whole, but also spend the bulk of the time really talking about how they've gone with that one thing, okay? So the real goal for us here is to make everything super, super simple for a start, make it a clear model, has clear progression steps, but also, more than anything else, it makes our communication and check-ins with the client relevant to their goal. So we've tied the one thing, okay, the one thing is tied to their goal. And then if we tie our check-ins and communication rather to the one thing, everything is then relevant. On top of that, then it's about relationships, it's about support, it's about accountability, it's about making them feel really valued and important, as always. But this means we're not asking, hey, how's it going? Very, very general. It's like, how did you go with eating breakfast? How many days did you do it? What went well? What were the obstacles? Straight away, far more relevant, far more efficient for both parties as well. There's less barriers.